Hey, 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 everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to the stream. I am like supercharged on energy right now because I took a red-eye flight in from California last night, took a long nap this morning. I'm running on coffee and a dream, baby. But as you can tell, I am back in Florida. I'm back in the home studio, and I'm so excited for all things today's stream with you guys. I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to get them all out, I promise. But as to an explanation, if you guys didn't know why we weren't live last night or yesterday afternoon, depending on what time you guys were watching, I was in California the last 24 hours because I got to participate in a really, really cool roundtable event hosted by our awesome friends at the American Conservation Coalition. I've done some work with ACC over the last couple of years, but if you guys aren't familiar with them, they are really the only major right-of-center environmental organization for young people in America. I grew up in the mountains of Colorado. I am nothing if not a conservationist at heart and in practice, and so love the work that they are doing because really caring for the environment is not a partisan issue, and it really shouldn't be in America moving forward. So I was able to go with them to a super cool non-disclosed location in Los Angeles yesterday Ordinarily, I hate LA, but it was the most fun day because I got to meet the one and only Arnold Schwarzenegger with this really cool event co-hosted by the Schwarzenegger Institute, ACC, and some other organizations as well to provide a conservative perspective on conservation and the 2024 election for Generation Z and how environmentalism is really going to play into that. So The Hill was able to do some really, really cool coverage of the event. We did some interviews and stuff, and that should all be airing on Thursday. I'll make sure to share all of that with you guys as soon as I have it. But huge thank you and huge shout out to ACC and to the Schwarzenegger Institute. And of course, to Arnold himself. Thank you so much for facilitating that very cool event yesterday. And now let's jump into the stream. I have been thinking for a really long time that we've been covering so many negative stories lately on all of the videos that we're posting on Instagram, on TikTok, on the topics that we're covering on the show. I wanted to pivot my content and my focus in these next few months, and particularly the next few weeks, because everything just seems doomsday all the time, to much more positive and hopeful stories, because we can play the tinfoil hat doomsday thing all day long, but honestly, I would rather speak life into you guys and speak hope into your desperation and hopelessness using this platform than anything else. And that's exactly what today's episode of the stream is all about, is giving you hope for this next generation and for societal and cultural shifts that have been needing to happen for such a long time, particularly as it pertains to the entertainment industry and dating and relationship culture. Today on the stream, we're going to be covering a really cool study that was conducted by UCLA about how Gen Z actually wants less sex scenes in TV and movies rather than more, which is what Hollywood continues to feed us. And I think this speaks to a much larger cultural shift on the values of our generation and what we're looking for moving forward. So we're going to talk about all of it, which is very, very exciting. But first, do me a huge, huge favor if you guys haven't already, and like the stream so that as many people as possible can participate in the conversation. That might look like a little thumbs up or a heart depending on where you're watching. And most importantly, smash that follow or subscribe button wherever you guys are watching to make sure that you always know when we're going live or posting a new video. You guys might see a little logo down in the corner or right above you, depending on where you are watching, for our friends over at Hallow. And they are our sponsor of today's stream. I am so excited to be working with Hallow throughout Lent this spring up until Easter, which is coming up in like 30-something days. Blows my mind that that was very quick. With Hallow, we are giving you guys a very exclusive, super rare opportunity to have a 3-month free trial for all of their incredible prayer and meditation and fasting and podcast content on their app. They are absolutely phenomenal. And honestly, listening to Hallow's prayer content has truly changed my life. I listen to it at the gym. I listen to it when I'm driving to and from the airport. I listen to it on airplanes. It genuinely has brought so much hope and a sense of being grounded and a foundation back into my life when everything kind of feels up in the air and floating around like crazy. So I'm really, really grateful for the impact that it's made for my life. But if you guys want a free 3-month trial to over 5,000 prayers and meditations on America's largest Christian prayer app, that is Hallow, and more specifically, their Pray 40 campaign, which is going on throughout the next several weeks into the last 40 days leading up to Easter, the season that we call Lent. I highly, highly, highly recommend going to check it out. You can go to hallow.com, HALLOW/Isabel, ISABEL, to snag that free 3-month trial and check out all of their content. I know a lot of you guys already have already, and I hope it will continue to change your life. Okay, let's talk Hollywood and Gen Z and entertainment and all of the good things, because honestly, when I read this study for the first time, it genuinely blew my mind and was not even what I expected Gen Z was going to be looking for in the realm of the entertainment industry. You guys know I am the biggest proponent of we have no reason to have anything but hope for Gen Z, but really the trenches of a lot of the cultural issues that we're dealing with, in my opinion, center around the influence of the pornography industry in America today. And in case you're not already familiar, we're going to dive into some really specific statistics here in just a bit, but the pornography industry has really captivated the entire culture surrounding dating and marriage and sex in general. for cultural norms with Generation Z for quite some time. Now, the average age of exposure for young men to pornography is like 10 to 12 years old. Most teenagers have been exposed to rampant porn, and porn isn't just localized to sites like Pornhub anymore. It's showing up randomly as we're scrolling through Twitter, or showing up on YouTube ads in between children's content, which, yes, does in fact happen, or frankly is just on some of the most popular TV shows of our time. If you guys don't already know, Euphoria is the most popular TV show among teenagers from the last several years. I've never actually watched it, really never had a desire to, but long gone are the days where it's like suggestive content for teenagers. Euphoria is just basically straight up pornography. Like, I believe I read something about one episode having more than 30 penises flashing the screen throughout one episode of the show. So when I read this study, I was expecting the norm to be, well, that's just normal, so we'll just keep it. We'll just lean into it. It's fine to have sex on screen because we see it on all of our screens all the time. But in reality, probably because it's been so normalized and we're really disgusted by how normalized it's become, Gen Z is taking the pendulum and swinging it far in the other direction, actively desiring less illicit adult sexual content on screen in our favorite TV shows and movies. And basically nobody in the mainstream media is talking about this. This study was conducted by UCLA last fall. It was published in October. Variety magazine picked it up, but outside of that, I haven't seen anybody in mainstream media actually talk about this, particularly outside of entertainment media and more so in the general news side of things. I guess for them, they want to be able to continue saying Gen Z is destroying culture. We don't want any good headlines for Gen Z. Conspiracies, I know. But I think this gives me no reason to have anything but hope and promise for desiring more. In an era and a culture and a timeline that treats people like transactional commodities, Gen Z is realizing we have far greater innate worth as human beings, and we can offer each other far greater depth of love and true connection than just shallow, disgusting sexual content on social media and on television and in the movie industry that really doesn't need to be there. So first things first, we're going to check out this article and then talk about why I was surprised by the results of this study, because I don't think that it's any surprise to anybody that pornography has just become so unbelievably normalized today. So we'll cover some statistics there. And then I want to zoom even further out to why this speaks to a larger cultural issue, that Gen Z is embracing conservative traditional values. Forget about associating that with like a red hat or a certain political party, but why Gen Z is embracing these more conservative traditional values in 2024 and beyond. So let's jump right in. This is from Variety magazine last October, so just a couple of months ago. And again, this study was conducted by the University of California, Los Angeles. I think how this article is written is also just incredibly eye-opening to me, because I genuinely am just shocked that Hollywood is leaning more into a story like this. Like Variety magazine looking at this data and saying, hey, Hollywood, we want something different. You guys probably should be going in a different direction, speaks volumes to me about the power of Gen Z as a consumer base and the impact that we are able to make on culture and society at large. So let's read this together out loud. A lot of people are asking in the chat if this is live or pre-recorded. This is actually live. Hello. Hello. It is 3:28 p.m. on Tuesday, February 27th. So I got you. Good to answer that question. Okay. They said, newsflash for Hollywood executives. Young people aged 13 to 24 are looking for less sex scenes in television and in movies. UCLA's Center for Scholars and Storytellers created this whole report called the Teens and Screens report. In and of itself, kind of a revolutionary thing that they wanted to create, a teens and screens report, in my opinion, because really teens and screens are innately symbiotic at this point. We like to call ourselves screenagers for a reason. So the fact that people are even doing academic studies into the impact of screen time on our generation is really, really promising, particularly as it applies to illicit adult sexual content. So I'm really glad these studies are coming to fruition. And the study found that almost 52% of adolescents would like to see more content depicting friendships and platonic relationships rather than sexual romantic partnerships. fascinating. The study at large surveyed more than 1,500 young people aged 10 to 24, and the questions about sex on screen were specifically directed to 13 to 24-year-olds, but over 1,500 people were asked about these questions. And here's what they had to say. Their answers might just surprise you. According to the study, 44.3% of young people in America felt that romance in media is overused. Around 39% would like to see more depictions of aromantic or asexual characters. I guess that's hardly surprising in the realm of LGBTQ identities, including aromance and asexual people, but that's okay. But here's where I think it gets really, really, really interesting. 47.5%, almost 50% of the people who participated in this survey reported that sex is not necessary to the majority of TV shows and movie plots. In and of itself, that statistic alone should absolutely blow your mind. That half of young people today think that sex scenes aren't needed, are completely unnecessary, and have nothing to do with the actual plot of our favorite TV shows and movies. And as I said earlier, especially in the era of the most popular TV shows and streaming services and movies of our time, including content like that of Euphoria, which is basically just straight up pornography, half of people engaging with this content every day, not enjoying it or saying it's not necessary, speaks volumes to how Hollywood is missing the mark with the values of our generation. This survey, the Teens and Screens report from UCLA, also interviewed celebrities, and they interviewed Olivia Rodrigo they quoted Olivia Rodrigo for this particular survey and research project. And they said that she had said in a previous interview about the Barbie movie that she really enjoyed seeing the Barbie movie this last year because, wow, it's so long since I've seen a movie that is female-centered in a way that isn't sexual or is about her pain or her being traumatized. So even the people participating in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry, in this illicit content that really objectifies individuals and puts sex at the forefront of all of our values on screen, of all of our relationships and how we emulate those relationships off screen, even the actors and celebrities participating in it are over it. It's refreshing for them to see movies that have nothing to do with sexual relationships. Listen to what a few of the participants in the survey had to say as well. A 17-year-old black male from Georgia said, "I don't like that every time a male and female character are together on screen, studios feel the need to make them fall in love. There is a complete lack of platonic relationships in American cinema." That's fascinating. A 23-year-old Asian female from New York spoke on another relationship stereotype. The guy would always be a jerk to a woman on a TV show or in a movie, but she would end up falling in love with him. That's fascinating. That absolutely blows my mind. Outside of the realm of sex and romance as this shortcut to character connection that people seem to be really frustrated with, some of the other survey results ended up really inspiring and interesting, created some interesting thoughts in my brain about this as well. So 56% of adolescents also preferred original content over franchises and remakes. Not surprising at all, considering what they do to all of the remakes and destroy franchises by creating horrible content that didn't need to be there. Total side note, departure from this conversation for half a second. Have you guys watched any of the new Netflix live action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender? If so, not worth it. Just don't do it, okay? I'm really disappointed. The costumes and the sets and the cinematography are very, very cool, but the story is just completely different. So it's not surprising to me that almost 60% of us don't want remakes anymore because they just keep destroying remakes at every possible opportunity. They said that they love authenticity. Our generation said we love authenticity, and the larger group of 10 to 24-year-olds ranked Mr. Beast as the number one most authentic media out there. Wow. That in and of itself also speaks volumes to me about the power of a consumer demographic, a consumer generation that can change culture as we know it. Because when else in human history has one YouTube channel, has one creator wielded more influence than arguably the president of the United States, than any major Hollywood studio, than any huge franchise or remake or multi-million-dollar TV show or movie project? a guy making videos on YouTube is the most beloved media out there because he happens to be the most authentic and creates content that isn't trying to shove an agenda down your throat, that isn't trying to get you to buy into adult illicit sexual content. That's just fun, just a guy having fun. So mind-blowing, honestly, and shocking to me that nobody is talking about this, right? Because I would like to believe that if almost 50% of our generation is actively saying we don't want to see sex scenes on TV shows and in movies anymore, it does nothing for the plot, and frankly, we just don't want to watch that content, period. That should be mind-blowing information in our pornographic, obsessed, screenager, decaying culture society that everybody wants you to believe that we're living in. But this to me is like this tiny spot of light at the end of the tunnel of something that we should be running towards, because it shows that we're trying to reject modern cultural norms. We're acting in a countercultural revolution to bring traditional values into the 2020s in kind of a new age way, which is my exact hypothesis on what we're doing for everything culturally with Generation Z. But here, I think, is arguably one of the most important battles culturally that we are fighting, because what the pornography industry and too much illicit content and adult content on TV shows and in movies has done is decayed the fabric of some of our most important relationships in society. And that would be our dating relationships and our marriages and our families. As a result, it speaks volumes to me that as pornography has become more and more and more normalized, we're pulling away from it with a higher sense of passion and integrity, wanting something much more meaningful than what the world has to offer us. And you guys might be watching this even if you're a parent and you're not a Gen Zer, or maybe you don't have a lot of Gen Zers in your life and you're thinking, okay, well, that's true for some people, but that really couldn't be true for me or my family. It certainly isn't happening with my kids. Absolutely 100% wrong. This is happening with your family and with your kids and the people that you know in your own personal life. In case you guys didn't already know this, just some of the updated statistics on porn addiction becoming a growing concern with Generation Z. This was published just a few weeks ago on January 16th, but I want you to read some of this about the porn statistics with teenagers in America today, because this should blow your mind. 9 out of 10 boys are exposed to some sort of pornography before the age of 18. 6 out of 10 girls are exposed to pornography before the age of 18. So long gone is this misconception that this is just a boys issue or a young men's issue. It's absolutely impacting young women as well. I said this earlier, but on average, a man's first exposure to pornography is about 12 years old. Some studies are actually saying it's about 10 years old today, so it's getting younger and younger and younger. 71% of teenagers have done something to hide what they're doing online from their parents, obviously instituting a whole lot of shame in their life because of what this industry is doing. And teenage boys aged 12 to 17 years old have the highest risk of developing a porn addiction than any other age demographic in the United States of America, when literally the vast majority of online searches have to do with the pornography industry, when there are tens of thousands of people watching pornographic content every single second on the internet, and when that has escaped what we would traditionally associate with porn, like these weird secret dark web websites or even Pornhub, but actually glossed the screens of the highest grossing TV shows of our time, or our Twitter feeds, or even ads on YouTube on children's programming. You would not believe the stories that I get from you guys. The more it's becoming normalized, and I would have had assumed, become numb to it. But I actually think in the era of people assuming that we're becoming numb to it, people are waking up and realizing that we are deserving so much better, that sex isn't supposed to be a transactional commodity. It isn't supposed to be this glossed over, highly edited, curated fake thing that we're seeing on our screens. It's supposed to be a real, tangible, intimate act of true love with somebody who genuinely respects and loves you. And because we're waking up to start realizing this, we're demanding better. We're demanding better from ourselves. We're demanding better from our partners and the people that we're dating. And we're certainly demanding better from the entertainment industry as well. So before we zoom out to why this matters at a 30,000 foot level, I'm really curious, chat, do you guys agree or do you disagree that we should have less sex scenes on TV and in movies, because most of the people that I'm asking about this who are my age say that they fast forward through most of the sex scenes that they see. They want absolutely nothing to do with it. And headlines like this absolutely 100% are pertaining to their personal lifestyle and what they see in culture in America. Tons of people saying agree. I absolutely love that. I like this. Peapod says, I'm a parent. My daughter is 14. She and 6 other classmates walked out of their sex ed class to them because it looked like porn to them and was not mediocre diagrams, but actual video and photographs. Peapod, you are an incredible parent for raising a daughter that is courageous and bold enough to just get up and leave if they are uncomfortable with something, particularly in sex ed class, which is normally a very uncomfortable situation to be in. That is absolutely incredible. And thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think that is just fascinating. People are saying, yes, I agree with you 100% as a Gen Zer. Greta says, agreed, more shows about how to build and keep a healthy relationship and more movies about creating a relationship with God. That's really, really interesting, because some of the movies that are performing the best in the box office this last year have been about faith or included some aspect of faith. Look at what's happening with The Chosen in the box office the last couple of months. Obviously, Sound of Freedom setting all kinds of records earlier last year. Cabrini, I'm really excited to go see in the next couple of weeks in theaters. So that's really, really interesting. Labyrinth says sex scenes are so cringy. I mean, honestly, I think that is how people are starting to feel that. Like, they're starting to think that this is such a cringy, unnecessary addition to the stuff that we want to watch. We really just want a good storyline. We don't need you to put a bunch of filler content that nobody needs to see on screen, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Matthew says, movies in general have been uninteresting over the last 2 decades. I'm 40 and I can't stand movies as entertainment anymore. I actually was just talking to my fiance about this the last couple of weeks. I was saying that in Hollywood, I've been noticing that most of the creativity and most of the big budgets and the best writing and costumes and everything isn't really going towards movies anymore. It happens to be going more towards streaming TV shows and series. Like, I feel like all the best ideas are going towards a Netflix series or an HBO original series or a Peacock series or whatever, but not actually movies, which is kind of sad. I actually wonder if we're at the end of the era of movies as we've known it, glossing the screens. Miguel says, yeah, this doesn't need to be added to tell the story. It's just not required, and it doesn't tell realistically what sex looks like. Not every relationship is going to just make out when it's not needed, period. Well, that's absolutely correct. That is so fascinating. Alp says, I thought they didn't even need to see those scenes because they're already hooking up and sleeping around, LOL. Actually, interestingly, the opposite is true. Teenagers in America today are having record low numbers of premarital sex. Like, they're not sleeping around. They have no interest in doing that. And there could be a zillion different reasons contributing to that. I actually think the pornography industry is one of the biggest reasons that teenagers are having record low numbers of sex. But it is interesting that they're having less sex in real life and they don't want to see it on TV and in movies, period. Old Man Trucker says, it's true, Hollywood always feels the need to throw sexual tension into a show. Absolutely, 100%. I agree with that. Horrors of Cody said, it was cool when it was taboo, like horror. Now it's just lame because there's nothing taboo. I mean, there's some truth to that. There is absolutely truth to the fact that the reason that Skinamax or HBO was so scandalous and why it took off was because there was an element of forbidden fruit to all of that you weren't supposed to watch it. But now when it's literally everywhere, that's a really sad reality that there's nothing alluring about this content anymore. Achilles says in a very loud tone, it's because you are making youth despise sex. I actually totally disagree with that point of view. And as we're segueing this out to the 30,000 foot level on why I think this trend speaks to a larger cultural shift with Generation Z, I think it has less to do with telling young people they should hate sex and hate adult relationships, but actually that they should love them enough to want better, frankly. I say this all the time, that sex is not a bad thing. To the contrary, it's a beautiful thing. It is one of the most beautiful gifts that we could have ever been given from God about what intimacy can achieve in the confines of a relationship with somebody who truly respects and truly loves you, where you can give 100% of yourself to another human being to become one flesh, to participate in God's design for creating new life by creating new life yourself. Like, that is mind-blowing to me. And a couple of months ago, I was at my marriage retreat with my fiance at our church to talk about all of our church prep stuff. It's kind of like a mandatory thing that we have to do. And it was so unbelievably cool listening to the session about intimacy in a way that it was never explained to me before. And I wish that they could have explained this to me before, even in like Catholic high school growing up, or in the conversations that I was having in sex ed growing up. The way that sex was described in our intimacy session at our marriage retreat a couple of weeks ago was that sex is not just supposed to be an act of intimacy with you and your spouse and is something that you guys should enjoy and fall in love with each other doing. It's also an act of worship, because you are quite literally worshiping God by participating with him in the creation of new human life. You are more God-like when you are participating in sex with your spouse than in any other act of service or of love that you could possibly give to them, which blew my mind, right? Like, that way of looking at sexual intimacy is the coolest freaking thing in the entire world. And I think because Generation Z is really reevaluating our purpose, our mission, our worth in life, and wanting a more worthy mission and purpose to donate our lives to dedicate our passions and our interests and our energy to in this lifetime, rather than the emptiness of postmodern woke culture, we're starting to realize that there is an intended meaning for this that is far greater, far more beautiful, and far more satisfying than the hollow lies that our culture is trying to get us to buy into. Maybe that's because we've just been so exposed to everything illicit and everything off limits and everything pornographic for so long that it's just everywhere, which is sad that we had to get here. But I feel really optimistic and hopeful that we arrived at this desolate place and we're realizing, wow, this really is rock bottom. I don't want to live like this anymore. We don't want to live like this anymore. And we deserve a whole lot more as humanity. So let's go demand it for ourselves. So to answer your guys' concerns or questions there, I don't think teenagers are having less sex because they're being taught to hate sex. I don't think teenagers are demanding less sex scenes on screen because they're being taught to hate sex. I think for the first time, people are starting to explain to Generation Z, sex is a beautiful thing. It is a gorgeous gift. It is a sacred act of worship, of which you can participate in and be more like God through if you have an intimate union in the right context and in the right circumstances. And it's worth holding out for that. As you pertain this shift towards traditionalism and traditional values to largely what's happening in culture and politics in America right now, I think it's really promising that Generation Z is in fact becoming a whole lot more traditionally conservative. And when I say that word conservative, I'm not saying that in the context of exactly who you're going to vote for the president of the United States, or wearing a red hat, or the letter next to your name on your voter registration. When I say conservative, I mean more traditionally, culturally conservative values. And I say this all the time. Nobody really seems to believe me, but if you think logically about this, what has every single young generation always wanted to do throughout all of human history? Every single generation of young adults and adolescents has had one common shared goal in life, and that is to rebel against the people that came before us, to rebel largely against the people that are in positions of power. Traditionally, that punk rock youth countercultural movement has looked like spiky hair and bodies full of tattoos and weird piercings and punk rock and metal and the whole nine about sticking it to the man, right? But today, sticking it to the man and being countercultural is to rebel against authoritarian leftism that has taken over every single pillar of American culture. If you look at the church, if you look at the entertainment industry, if you look at education, if you look at politics, if you look at everything else in American society, example by example by example, it's all being governed by woke, postmodern, authoritarian leftism, by the cancel culture mob. And if that is the norm, if that constitutes the people in power, the number one way that you can rebel against that, the number one way that you can be counterculturally punk rock today is to embrace traditional conservative cultural values. And that is exactly what we are seeing with Generation Z, even if the polling is still having to catch up with that a little bit. There was a new poll that dropped earlier today that actually I'm going on Fox News to talk about tonight with Laura Ingram's show. So in case you're around 7:15 p.m. Eastern time, I will be on to talk about this, that young people are actually starting to shift in political polling away from Joe Biden and towards Donald Trump for this election. Forget whatever you think about the political candidates. I think that's echoing the cultural shift that's been happening with Gen Z for the last several years, where young people are embracing more conservative, traditional cultural values. And obviously that's going to manifest with more conservative politics as well. If you look at the data and the research, depending on which poll you read, Generation Z has been found to be the most conservative generation on an issue-by-issue basis that America has seen since World War II. And Gen Z men are the most overwhelmingly conservative group of young men that we've seen in America since the 1950s. Since the 1950s. A recent survey that just came out a couple of days ago, actually, about 3 weeks ago, blew my mind on this very subject, that there is a political and cultural glimpse into America's future with Generation Z's changing views. And listen to just a few of these topics because this just might surprise you. Gen Z adults trend slightly less Republican than older Americans, but only slightly. There is not this massive canyon divide between other older people than us and Gen Z adults between trending Republican as adults or not. More than half of Gen Z teens, though, do not identify with any major political party. 51% of teenagers today do not identify with either major political party, largely because we are voting with our values first. We are embracing conservative cultural values first, and we're not seeing that manifested in the political sphere, which is fascinating. Get a load of this. Gen Z adults, which are the older ones among us, tend to be more liberal than older Americans. But if you go younger, Gen Z teens, the younger half of Generation Z, are far more moderate than older Americans than us, leaning far more conservative. We're going to come back to this statistic in a different study here in just a second. Gen Z women are substantially more liberal than Gen Z men. But if you go down to teenagers, Gen Z teenagers are very, very, very neck and neck conservative and liberal, men and women. So there's kind of this disenfranchisement from the American political system at large. But if you go to the issue by issue basis, Gen Z is overwhelmingly embracing conservative ideas and values. This graph went incredibly viral a couple of months ago and was talked about by almost every single right of center political pundit talking head on the podcast world. Axios had reported on this, but I think this data is from Gallup. Yeah, it is. This is a share of Americans age 18 to 29 who identify as liberal. And you're starting to look at the massive gap between women and men. This is among 1,000 U.S. adults surveyed annually from 1999 to 2023. So this 40 and 25% way at the end is 2023, just a couple of months ago. Men, obviously, are trending far more conservative, while women are trending far more liberal. But it's incredibly telling to me that young women today only identify as liberal with 40% of us. 18 to 29-year-old women, only 40% of 18 to 29-year-old women are identifying as liberal. And that's like a record high, basically, with the exception of 2019, 2020. Only 25% of young men are identifying as conservative, as liberal, rather, 18 to 29-year-olds. Only 25% of 18 to 29-year-old men are identifying as liberal. So the inverse, 75% of them are leaning more conservative and moderate. That's insane. And nobody wants to talk about that because it doesn't fit the narrative of Gen Z being this overwhelmingly leftist and socialist and entitled participation trophy angry generation that's destroying America. In reality, we're actually embracing some of the most traditional cultural values in modern history, putting a modern spin on them and making them our own. But we might be the last saving grace for this crazy experiment called Western civilization, period, full stop, even after the mistakes that were made by the people who raised us, which is absolutely fascinating to me. I actually think the data on young men and young women still has a long time to catch up as well, because even though it says young women are so overwhelmingly liberal and young men are so overwhelmingly conservative, anecdotally, what I'm seeing with young women today actually is starting to prove the opposite. And so I think a lot of the political polling has yet to catch up with the cultural shifts in society today. And obviously we know that to be true. It was the late, great Andrew Breitbart that said politics is always downstream from culture. So I always like to have my finger on the pulse upstream, what's going on culturally, and how is that going to impact politics later on. If you start looking at some of the biggest cultural issues of our time, like dating and relationships, like education, like our careers, like our faith, women are leaning far more conservatively culturally, again, forget about hat colors and the letter of the party that you vote for, but culturally than anyone is giving us credit for. And I like to tell this story all the time, but last spring I had the opportunity about a year ago to travel to Santa Barbara, California and be on the very famed Whatever podcast. I'm sure you guys have all seen clips of it. It was a really enlightening experience, but I found myself sitting around this round table speaking with women who had dramatically different points of view and world experiences than myself. Somebody was a recovering sex addict, somebody was an active pornography actress, one girl was an OnlyFans creator, most were these woke progressive liberal women from their college campuses, and I went into the experience with my guard up thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to debate. It's going to be so angry. I got to prove my point. I got to be right. We're going to own the libs, and got bought into this narrative that it was me versus them. But my guard very quickly was let down in this conversation that lasted 5 hours. You can go watch it on my YouTube channel if you guys haven't already. But 5 hours into this conversation, I'm looking around the room and I'm realizing that throughout the entire conversation, myself and every single woman sitting around this table have all been saying the exact same thing the whole time. We might be using slightly different vocabulary, but when we went around the table and we talked about birth control, every single one of us said we wanted to quit or already had quit our hormonal birth control because it was destroying our personal health. Every single woman sitting around this table said they felt like they had been lied to by modern feminism, and they felt like they had been duped by hookup culture because it wasn't making them any happier. It wasn't making their relationship quality any better. It wasn't adding any liberation or freedom to their lives. They just felt like they were lied to buy into cheap half in, half out sexual relationships with men who didn't really care about them. Every single woman sitting around this table felt like hookup culture was a net negative to society. And Brian, the host of the Whatever podcast, even asked all of these women, if given the opportunity, would you take the chance to date and or marry a conservative or pro-life man? And almost every single woman sitting around the table said, yes, absolutely. I would 100% consider that. And so I just was blown away. I was genuinely floored because I walked in thinking this was going to be some angry, vitriolic, hate-fueled debate where I would have to prove these women wrong. But I actually found myself feeling much more empathetic and sad for the many, many lies that women of our generation have bought into culturally that have then gone downstream to impact politics, like abortion policy, like whatever we want to talk about with gender politics. But upstream, we're over it. Upstream, culturally, we see the lies. We acknowledge that they are lies. We can acknowledge that they are hurting our lives, that it's causing a net negative impact to society at large, and that we deserve a whole hell of a lot better than the shallow emptiness and facade that modern feminism and modern culture had to offer us. So, if we can acknowledge that all of those things are lies, young people today, young women even, despite identifying as overwhelmingly politically progressive, overwhelmingly leftist, culturally, we are embracing conservatism again. And the data absolutely supports this on the cultural side, which I think is going to manifest here very, very soon on the political side as well. Also from Axios, this is from October of last year, more and more young women are quitting birth control. I love this little graphic of all the Ghostbusters no. Like, absolutely no, we want nothing to do with this right now. Effective forms of birth control and the turn against them are starting to raise concern, this article went on to say, for the risk of unplanned pregnancies in a post-Roe v. Wade America. But forget about all of the political chatter. More and more young women are quitting our hormonal birth control because we're realizing that it's just straight up slow release poison that's causing us to have strokes and cancer and heart attacks and all kinds of other physical problems, not to mention is destroying our mental health and giving us unprecedented rates of anxiety and depression and suicide. 1 in 3 teenage girls seriously contemplated taking her own life in 2021, according to the CDC. I wonder how much of that has to do with birth control, but we'll probably never know because nobody wants to fund a study about that. We're learning that birth control is causing us to be attracted to more feminine men, and we lose our sense of sex drive and libido when we do get married and we want to have those experiences, and we change who we're attracted to or who's attracted to us because we mess with our natural pheromones, etc. So the crazy progressive leftist cohort of young women are actively quitting their hormonal birth control. How about this one from Newsweek magazine just a couple of days ago? Gen Z women are deleting dating apps within a month because, as we call it, it is a waste of time. It says, while finding love might be seen as an online game by many in today's culture, there is a wave of Gen Zers ditching the apps and searching for someone in person. A whopping 65% of dating apps get deleted within just a month. And of those who uninstall the apps, 90% do it within a week. Apparently, young women in particular are embracing the trend of returning to dating in the wild. I love how that's said, as a breath of fresh air to so many daters who feel burnt out from endless swiping and failed connections. So the overwhelmingly hookup obsessed, leftist, crazy feminist, postmodern women of Gen Z want nothing to do with our dating apps, and we're starting to delete them literally 90% of the time within 1 week. Within 1 week, want nothing to do with it. And certainly within a month, realizing that the hollow, shallow facade of what the world tells us is going to be happy and fulfilling and joyful in our lives really has nothing to offer us. And then if we're embracing something bigger, if we're wanting something more, if we're realizing we are worthy of more than what culture has to offer us, Gen Z is also projected to change sinking marriage rates. This was published also just a few days ago from Newsweek magazine. You guys have heard me talk about this all the time, but America currently has our lowest marriage rate, one of our lowest marriage rates ever recorded since we began discussing and recording marriage rates in 1867 in our country. It's absolutely staggering how little people are getting married. But Newsweek magazine seems to believe that if there's any generation able to change this and dramatically shift the pendulum back to be countercultural and rebellious against cultural norms, it's going to be Gen Z. They say over the last 50 years, marriage rates have plummeted by roughly 60%, according to the National Center for Family and Marriage Research. While marriage used to be seen as a rite of passage, millennials have been foregoing the life event that many of their elders viewed as necessary. A Pew Research report published just last year found that a quarter of American 40-year-olds had never been married, over 25%, compared to just 6% of 40-year-olds who had never been married in the 1980s. However, and this is what's really, really fascinating, despite not getting married as the cultural norm, Newsweek says Gen Z, comprised of people born between the mid-1990s and the early 2010s, might be looking to change that as they value serious relationships with a focus on marriage, according to a new Her Campus report. Gen Z overwhelmingly said serious relationships were important to them. More than 40% of us are currently involved in serious relationships, and 27 additional percentage points of us are looking for a serious relationship. And a clear majority, 93%, said that they were interested in marriage if they weren't already in the process of getting married. 93% of our generation either already getting married or very serious about the opportunity to get married in our future, that it's not this far off pipe dream. It's not even an outdated concept that we want nothing to do with. It is a sacred institution that has stood the test of time, that we know is going to bring more positivity, more joy, more meaning and fulfillment to our lives than the shallow nature of swiping back and forth on endless apps, than the shallow lies and propaganda of the pornography industry that's objectively not real and destroying intimacy for our generation, and this narrative that we should never expect real commitment because somehow commitment is less empowering than flitting around and being passed around from person to person. So all of this is insanely good news. And yet nobody is talking about it. Nobody in the media wants to say that Gen Z is overwhelmingly conservative, particularly not even conservative media wants to say that. I got an invite to go on Fox News literally like an hour ago for tonight because they are shocked and amazed over there that Gen Z is trending a little bit more towards Donald Trump than Joe Biden. But if we really believe that politics is downstream from culture, let's go upstream for a second and see what's happening culturally with our generation. We're deleting our dating apps almost immediately because they don't work. They literally don't work. They just lied to us. It's false advertising. And actually, there are a lot of people suing dating apps, including the Match Group, for failing to follow through on their advertisements that you should delete your dating app very relatively soon because we promise to find you somebody that you'll end up with. We are rejecting hookup culture. Teenagers are having record low numbers of teenage premarital sex. We are rejecting the idea that sex scenes need to be in every single TV show and movie because, spoiler, they do quite literally nothing to advance the plot of anything that we see in the entertainment industry. And we just think it's really ridiculously cringe, to be honest with you. We're quitting our hormonal birth control because we're realizing that it's not at all empowering. It's not at all healthy for us in the vast, vast majority of circumstances. And it's actually destroying our lives through slow release poison. And we feel like we've all been lied to by our healthcare practitioners. So we're quitting in droves. We are desiring marriage at a rate of 93% when marriage is not normal. When we have a record low marriage rate in America and a record high divorce rate because we want to be countercultural. We want to be parents and have children and pass values on to them, even when society tells us children are going to ruin the environment, not to mention ruin your life. Just get a dog. Dogs are great. I love my dog, but it's not the same thing, right? We want more. And perhaps the best statistic that I could possibly share with you is that in 2021, only about 25%, only about a quarter of our generation said that we believed in a higher power, period. We didn't believe in God at a very, very high rate, and we were trending more in an atheist direction than believing in God. But by 2023, more than 1/3, more than 33% of us say that we believe in God, and it's trending in a different direction. It's trending in a greater belief in something bigger than ourselves. And that's where we start to change culture from the inside out. It honestly feels sometimes like we are living in two different Americas. And I know we say that all the time about the left versus the right and the media that we consume and the conversations that we have and the vocabulary that we use. But I really want to challenge you with your perception of how things are going in American culture today to look at the divide we're living through in America, not as a divide between right and left so much as it is a divide between generations. Because for whatever reason, a lot of the same people who I respect and look up to and have very much appreciated their mentorship over the last several years in conservative media who say politics are downstream from culture and you got to change culture first. They're refusing to acknowledge that we are changing culture, that Generation Z is not the millennial generation, that Gen Z is embracing traditional values in a new age way, but wanting something bigger than the hollow lies of leftism. That obviously that's going to spill over into politics as well if everything we do culturally eventually impacts politics, and that we're on the right path, we're on the right track. Because sadly, I see far too many people take opportunities that really shouldn't exist in the first place to condemn our generation, to say that we're stupid and lazy and entitled, that we are uneducated, that we're moronic, that we make really bad decisions, and yet we are actively doing all of the things that people have been fighting for a very long time. So if those older than us are so hell-bent on insisting that Gen Z is this terrible, desolate, hopeless generation, why are they so insistent upon it when all of the evidence is in favor of the opposite direction? When Gen Z is proving ourselves to right the ship, to take back the reins of American culture, to get in the driver's seat, to bring us into a future where we all can be proud to call our country and, frankly, world home again. I don't know where this story leads, and I don't know where the deception continues to be a priority for so many people with impactful platforms to silence and squash and put down our generation when we are doing all of the right things. But more importantly, I think actions speak a whole lot louder than words. So I can continue shouting from the rooftops on every cable television show and radio and everything else in traditional media that Gen Z is, in fact, probably the last saving grace for Western civilization, that we are the most conservative generation our country has seen in decades or even centuries, that we are looking for something bigger than the hollow emptiness of our secular, postmodern, atheist culture. But I think it means a whole lot more if we can show it, if we can prove it with our actions. And that is exactly what I write about in my new book, which I know you guys have been really excited to get your hands on a copy for, because this is true across the board. Even outside of dating and marriage and relationships and birth control, we're rejecting the idea that we need to buy a $250,000 4-year degree in something like underwater lesbian basket weaving. We're rejecting the idea that we need to be interns for some woke corporate CEO who lives in Midtown Manhattan or in San Francisco and wants to mandate that we have to wear something on our face all day in order to keep our job. Instead, we're just starting our own businesses and becoming CEOs on day one. 62% of us have already started our own businesses. We're turning off corporate state-sponsored traditional media, and we're learning about the news and what's going on in the world through live streams and TikTok videos and Instagram reels, and we're engaging in a more authentic and unscripted and grassroots way than ever before, and being honest about it, looking for real accountability and true journalism today in the era of fake news. We're canceling cancel culture and wanting to bring redemption back into the fold. And we're demanding better than what those before us have said is our best. And that, I think, is the true nature of an American patriot and a young voice ringing in truth. It's what we need to continue bringing into the future, because that's exactly what our country was built upon in the first place. So, W's in the chat. Gen Z is over sex scenes. We don't want them in TV and in movies, and we're demanding a change from Hollywood and beyond. But I'm excited to see where this trickles down into every other aspect of American culture as well. All right, you guys, we are going to jump over to Locals for our post-stream Q&A. Just as a reminder, if you become an annual supporter to our Locals community, you too will be able to get a free signed copy of my new book, The End of the Alphabet, talking about all of these issues when it hits shelves on March 19th, here in just a couple of weeks. I'm going to be announcing my book tour to you guys here in just a couple of days, which I'm super, super, super excited about. So I'm probably coming to a city near you, which I'm excited for you guys to be able to come stop by and meet me in real life and get your book signed as well. In the meantime, before you guys go, please do me a huge, huge favor if you haven't already, and send this stream to somebody that you know who really needs to hear some positive news about Generation Z. Maybe it's your curmudgeon aunt or uncle, or your favorite TV host, or somebody that just is missing the mark with who we are and the change that we are making in culture, because it's up to us to change the narrative and to start telling the truth again. We are back for the stream tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern, and I have some extra special surprise guests lined up for you for the latter half of the week. Thank you guys so much for your patience yesterday while I was in California meeting with the legendary Arnold Schwarzenegger himself. We will see you guys tomorrow. Locals, don't go anywhere. YouTube, Instagram, Rumble, Facebook, Getter. Go over to Locals. It's a really good time. Bye, guys.